The authentic wisdom of Kabbalah gives you the power to unlock the spiritual potential of our time. Thousands of KabU students around the world already experience this on a regular basis. We're inviting you to get a real taste of it. Experience Kabbalah will be a 4-hour virtual event filled with experiential lessons, interactive workshops, and some unique Kabbalistic practices, all wrapped in the welcoming atmosphere of our thriving global community. You'll be among people from all walks of life who share a common desire to experience the spiritual reality. Registration is open to everyone on a pay-whatever-you-wish basis, so if you have that desire in you, we'll see you there.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is so great to be here with you. So amazing. I'm so excited. And just before we start, we had a wonderful introduction, by the way, just exactly what we needed for this lecture. And just before we start, like Talia was saying, we're all here together. And even though Joseph and I and the other instructors are going to be talking, this is really all about all of us together. We're all doing this together. We're all changing together. We're all investing our desire, our intention. And in our talk right now, we'll see exactly how each of us contributes to everything that happens and why each of us here is so important and why we want each of you to feel like you're participating actively in what we're doing here together. So just before we begin, we want to ask you, we're all here. We know why we're here, right? We're here because we want something. We want spiritual development. We feel that there has to be more. There has to be more to life. We seek greater possibility, revelation, discovery. And that's why we're here, right? We're all interested in spiritual development. But we really want you to kind of try and right now just kind of focus on your heart and really ask yourself, what is my deepest spiritual desire? What does it actually look like? What does it really want? If you had a genie that could make your deepest, greater spiritual wish come true, what would you actually wish for? So we want you just to take a minute to really focus on that question and listen to your heart and see what comes up for you. You can write it down, and then we'll come back to that later, okay? So just take a moment now to ask that question. All right, I hope you all have your desires written down. We're going to come back to this later. And now we're about to take a journey together. And what we want to acknowledge is that our personal journey, it goes right along with our collective journey. It really can't be separated. So in the next hour, we're really going to be talking about the journey that we're all on, both as individuals and a collective. And we're going to find out, how are we going to fulfill that innermost desire that you have? All right. So let's start by just really taking a look at our world right now, what we're all feeling, what Gilad and Tali were talking about, how this world is really undergoing so much change. We're living in a time of increasingly growing paradoxes. And we want to ask why. What are they actually telling us? So we're going to look at some examples of where we are right now. So first, one of the biggest paradoxes we can see in our times is that we've become so incredibly globally interconnected, right? And yet this interdependence that we're seeing is expressed through all of these crises that are also interconnected and intertwined. So if you can see this image that I have here on the right, this is a global risks interconnections map. And as you can see, they're all connected. So we have ecological disasters that lead to involuntary migration, and then social instability that leads to national governance failure. And there's all of these crises that one leads to the other. Everything is connected. And this makes our global system very, very unstable. Now, here's another paradox that we see. We've become incredibly interconnected by media, by social media, and yet we're also hyper divided, incredibly polarized. So in the past couple of years, the overall measure of polarization in the US reached a critical level. I think we all feel it. It's all over the world. It's not just in America. And COVID has exacerbated this. There's a lot of research around it. The feelings of division have really increased significantly. In some cases, they say even 30% since COVID. So we're all feeling it. We're all together, we're interconnected, we're one world, but we're also very, very polarized. Here's another example of a paradox that we're living in. We have incredibly evolved technology today, right? And artificial intelligence. Yet, despite this great advancement in technology that was supposed to help us work less, be more efficient, and spend much more time doing what we like, we're actually working more. We're working a lot. And not only that, a lot of people don't really enjoy their jobs. So a global poll by Gallup has actually uncovered that 85% of people are unhappy in their jobs. And this is really funny because tech was there to make our lives better. And it's actually making us work all the time, right? Tech also means we're always at work. And those same apps and tools that are supposed to make us happy, that we're all addicted to, Facebook, all those things, they're actually, the research shows, they're actually making us more depressed, and they're not serving us. They're kind of enslaving us instead of serving us. And lastly, let's take a look at a last example of paradoxes we live in, is that even though we live in a world of abundance and plenty, right, we're kind of like kings today. We live like kings in comparison to what happened, say, 100 years ago, where people had a lot less material comfort. We have abundance of food and clothes and things and experiences, and yet we're not happier. In fact, if you look at the richer countries, the Western countries, where people have more, they're actually less happy. And mental health problems are very prevalent, unfortunately. We see a lot of anxiety and emptiness and loneliness. So the more we have, the less happy we are. Okay, so that's where we are. And now we want to ask this question. So why this paradox? What is happening here behind the scene? What is driving this dissonance that is getting bigger and bigger and really driving this change? So it's changing our environments, it's making them more interconnected, but also changing us on the inside, making us less satisfied and feeling like we need more. So we really want to uncover what is happening.
Yes, that is the role of the wisdom of Kabbalah, to really shed light on what is actually happening behind the scenes. That's where we want to go now. To understand what is actually happening around us, we're going to go deeper into the command center of reality. So fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a ride. We're going to see how everything that we see around us, personal, social, global, everything that's happening in the world, everything that's happening in our life, this entire material universe, the entire cosmos, is actually an outcome of a deeper, non-material reality. And in a few minutes, we're going to show you what is the general structure of reality behind the scenes. So Kabbalists describe all of reality, the non-material governing reality, causal reality behind everything that we see, as a relationship between two components. We call them in Kabbalah light and vessel. The light, represented here in this arrow, means the quality of unconditional love and bestowal. It is the life-giving force behind everything and anything that ever existed or will exist. It is the force that creates, sustains, and guides all of life. And that force, which is a quality of giving, a quality of unconditional love and bestowal, created a vessel which is designed to be a receptacle. So it has the exact opposite quality. So if the light, which we can also call the creator of the vessel, is a quality of bestowal, the vessel, which Kabbalists refer to as kli in Hebrew, which directly translates to vessel, that vessel is the created being. It is the receptacle, the opposite force, the opposite component that was created with a quality of reception designed to receive all of the abundance, all of the light that the light wishes to give. And not just being fulfilled is the purpose of the vessel. The purpose of the vessel that the light has created is to achieve not just fulfillment, but also complete unity with the light itself. So the light created the vessel in order to fulfill it and raise it to its level. So how does that happen? To achieve that purpose of creation, the light and the vessel go through 3 states in their relationship. So let's zoom in here for a second. In the first state of reality, the first state of the relationship between the light and the vessel, the light fills the vessel completely, entirely. The entire vessel is filled with light, but there's one problem. The vessel is unconscious. So think about it like an embryo in a womb. It has everything it needs in order to survive and grow and develop inside the womb. Everything it needs is given to it. Everything it doesn't need is taken away from it. It is completely enveloped in a warm atmosphere that grows it and develops it, but it feels nothing. The embryo doesn't have consciousness of itself or the light that fills it. And so that is the first state of existence, the first state of the relationship between the light and the vessel. And let's call that unconscious unity. Now, in order for the vessel to become conscious, first the vessel has to separate from the light. It has to, metaphorically speaking, come out of the womb. So how does that happen? The light gradually departs from the vessel through 125 degrees. And so in each of these levels, what happens here is that there's a reduced relationship between the light and the vessel. And with each degree, as we go down this ladder, the relationship between the light and the vessel is reduced all the way to the point where the last spark of light penetrates the very last degree, the very last layer of the will to receive, the vessel of reception that was created. And so that penetration of the spark of light into the lowest layer of the vessel creates in the vessel a perception of the material world. This is what scientists in our world identify as the Big Bang, some sort of inflationary explosion that set in motion the entire material universe. And from that beginning point, 13.8 billion years ago, based on our science within time and space, this is the beginning of the relationship between the light and the vessel from the ground up. So now the vessel and the light begin to rebuild their relationship from bottom up. And so the vessel starts regaining consciousness gradually. In our world, we see it through the development that we call material development. We see it in a way that evolution creates the still level of life, and then the vegetative level of life, the animate level, and ultimately the human level. And all of these levels of life are outcomes of the relationship between the light and the vessel, between these two opposite components, opposite qualities, opposite forces that are gradually building the next level of life until we come to the human level, which is us. And that is the point where the vessel that was created starts regaining consciousness to the point that it starts climbing back up the ladder of those 125 degrees of relationship between the light and the vessel. And that takes us to the third and final state of existence, the final state of relationship between the light and the vessel, a state of conscious unity. Kabbalists call this complete adhesion. Adhesion means like adhesive, right? It's two things that are bonded, completely bonded to the point that they are literally as one. And that's the state, the final state of relationship between the light and the vessel that all of evolution, all of life is moving towards. But here's the thing. What happens when we look at reality from where we are, which is here, this second state that where the light and the vessel's relationship appears as material perception, as the material world? What happens to us here? Here, these two forces are constantly appearing to us as growing tension, growing conflict. The entire evolution of life in our world looks to us like the interplay between two opposite forces. And until they reach their perfect state, that third state we talked about, of perfect unity, complete conscious unity between them, until then, in our world, through our corporeal eyes, that relationship mostly appears as increasing tension and conflict. Let's take a look at what the greatest Kabbalist of the previous century, Baal HaSulam, tells us about that exactly. There is none that does not obey the iron law of gradual evolution resulting from the collision of these two forces with one another. 1. A positive force, meaning constructive, and 2. A negative force, meaning negative and destructive. They create and complement the entire reality, in general and particular, through their harsh and perpetual war with one another until they reach their ultimate perfection. So two opposite forces running through all of reality from the micro to the macro. They may appear as plus and minus, protons and electrons, attraction and rejection, male and female, contraction and expansion, inhale and exhale. They can take the shape of physical forces, chemical reactions, biological processes, or even psychological discernments. Two opposite forces that gradually build every level of nature: still, vegetative, animate, human. And Baal HaSulam continues with this. Let's take planet Earth as an example. First, it was but a ball of fog-like gas. Through the gravity inside it, over time, it concentrated the atoms in it into a closer circle. As a result, the ball of gas became a liquid ball of fire. Over eons of terrible wars between the two forces within Earth, the positive and the negative, the chilling force in it was finally triumphant over the force of liquid fire. It cooled a thin crust around the Earth and hardened there. However, the planet had not yet grown still from the war between the forces, and after some time the liquid fire erupted in great tumult from the bowels of the Earth, rising and shattering the cold hard crust to pieces. Thus the eons interchanged, and each time the cooling force prevailed, the crust it made grew thicker. Finally, the positive forces overpowered the negative ones and came into complete harmony. The liquids took their place in the bowels of the Earth, and the cold crust became thick enough around them to enable the creation of organic life on top of it, as it is today. Okay, so 4.5 billion years ago, these two opposite forces that are ultimately non-material forces, spiritual forces, the light and the vessel. In our world, they manifest as heat and cold, attraction and rejection, just like Barasulam describes it, and they create planet Earth, and that's 4.5 billion years ago. But then Earth enables the next levels of life to emerge, which is biological organisms. So how do these two forces now manifest, these two opposite forces, in the development of organisms? So in the early Earth, the crust of the Earth was just one mass of minerals. And then what happened is that the two forces manifest as individuation and integration. What does that mean? So that one mass of minerals individuates into many different kinds of bacteria. So essentially, all the life that was in that crust was now packaged into many different units. But the other force, the force of integration, drives those individual bacteria to make contact with each other. And so through these two opposite forces, which now appear as integration and individuation, the bacteria go through about 1 billion years where they go through all kinds of states with each other, and they fight each other and colonize each other and take each other's resources until they learn how to connect within 1 billion years, right? How to connect in a new way that gives birth to something completely new, to a completely new level of life, which is the nucleated cell. And the nucleated cell is actually the only cell that ever evolved on this planet after the bacterial cell. It's the cell that makes up all of the life forms that we know, including us. So how does that happen? Once again, through the interplay, the conflict, the dance between these two opposite forces that appear as individuation and integration between organisms. So the nucleated cells also go through a time where they fight each other and colonize each other and try to make new forms of communication and share DNA and all kinds of things, until that too takes about 1 billion years or more, until they create a completely new level of life, which is the multicellular organism. Now we're at about 600 million years ago, by the way. And so all the planets and all the animals, all the plants and all the animals on planet Earth, including those that have began to evolve 200,000 years ago, which are Homo sapiens, us humans, all of them are multicellular organisms. So if we take a look at what is going on here and we try to just kind of put together what's happening in life, what is it that creates life, how these two forces work, into a simple formula, we get something like this. More diversity plus more connection gives us a higher level of being. So on the one hand, throughout nature, we see more diversity. That means more differences, more uniqueness, more individual things and individual qualities. On the other hand, the other force drives more connection, which means that the individual things are pushed to find ways to better communicate and better cooperate and relate to each other in a new way and share resources and so forth. And that tension between the diversity on the one hand and the growing connection on the other hand is what gives us birth to a higher level of being. Now, that's another point to kind of linger on for a second. What does a higher level of being actually means? It means that the higher level of being always has new qualities that didn't exist on the individual level. So for example, the nucleated cells have qualities that don't exist in the bacteria. The multicellular organisms have qualities that don't exist in the single cell organisms. That phenomenon is what scientists refer to as emergence. Emergence essentially means when an entity has properties and behaviors that its parts don't have on their own. So, as the famous saying goes, 1 + 1 = 3, or the sum is more, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. This process of emergence happens on every level of nature where individual things come together, even on the inanimate level. If you take hydrogen and oxygen, for example, you put them together in a certain way, you get water. Water has qualities like wetness, or the fact that it's a universal solvent, meaning that it can dissolve all kinds of materials, which is the fundamental condition for life. All of life came from water, right? So if you take hydrogen and oxygen, in and of themselves, they have none of these qualities. But when you put them together in a special way called H2O, you get water, which has completely new qualities. So this happens on every level of nature, this process of emergence. And perhaps it is the most visible and especially evident when it comes to individual organisms that create and form communities. How could it be that these 100,000 starlings move together like this, right? Where is the choreographer? What's going on? Who's telling them, guys, go here, go there. Now there's a predator coming. Try to do a maneuver like this way or that way. This phenomenon is called swarm intelligence. We see similar things in ants, fish, bees, fireflies, and so on. You can take it on and on. All throughout nature, you'll find this phenomenon. This is a phenomenon of emergence. Now, Kabbalists are very aware of this phenomenon. Here's what Baal HaSulam tells us, a classic example of it, right, in one of his articles. Anatomy deals with how the individual organs interact. However, these organs bear no resemblance to their collective carrier, which is the whole living person. So just think about what your organs are doing right now, right? Your organs are doing things like filtering blood and breaking apart food and moving oxygen around, all kinds of things like that. What do? We watch YouTube videos on our phone, or talk to our friends, or write essays, or participate in an Experience Kabbalah event, right? So there's a complete ascent of level when it comes to the collective being. There's as if there's no connection between what happens on the individual level and what happens on the collective level. Again, in simple words, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So again, more diversity plus more connection gives us a higher level of being. So we want to ask the question now, how does this process manifest in human society as a whole? If you look at all of humanity as a global species on planet Earth, how does the process of two opposite forces leading to emergence, how does that happen in global human society? How does it manifest in our psychological and social development throughout all of human history? That's what we want to find out now.
Right. So we're going on this amazing journey, looking at this evolution, and now we're coming to us, to human beings. What happens to us when we are evolving? How do these two forces play in the development of human society, of our psychology? So for us, for human beings, these two forces that Asaf was telling us how they evolve all of life, they look like egoism on one hand and interdependence on the other. So egoism, that's the individualistic diversity, right? All those things that make us who we are as individuals, that's one side of it. But then how we're all connected as a society, as a community, as a humanity, that is the other side. So if you look at human society, you'll see that there's always a tension between these two forces, between how much freedom we have as individuals versus how limiting our collective community or social structure is. And that's why different societies look different, right? We have individualistic societies in the West and then more collectivistic societies in the East. So really on the human level, what we're seeing is this tension between our desire, our individual desire, and how connected we are. When you look at what happens even in our personal relationships, you can see that as our desire for closeness, right? We want to be close to a partner, we want to be together, but we also have a longing for freedom, for personal freedom, for our own wants and desires. So we can even feel it in our interpersonal desires, how these two forces are always conflicting and always trying to find a balance. So let's also take a look at a model from psychology. So even psychologists have seen this in their work. They've noticed how human consciousness has been developing throughout human history. And if you see what they say, for example, psychologists Don Beck and Christopher Cohen, they describe the psychology of mature human beings as an unfolding, emergent, oscillating, spiraling process. So our psychology, our consciousness is not something static, rather it's something that is constantly growing over many, many years and generations. And if you look at this spiral, what's also so interesting about it is that these opposite forces within us are really causing us to shift consciousness from stage to stage, moving like a pendulum between more individualistic trends in our evolution to more collectivist trends. It's like the two forces are pushing us from side to side and always moving upwards towards greater complexity, greater diversity, and also greater interdependence. So now let's go on a little journey. We'll go through it quickly and see how human history has evolved and how these two forces played in order to make us who we are today. So going back 100,000 years ago, people are basically cavemen, right? They're living in a cave. They have very simple desires. They just want to survive and they want to fulfill their simple animalistic desires, and they live in small family groups. And then we jump forward 50,000 years and we see that humans have evolved. Now, in these first stages, evolution takes a long time, right? But as we go forward, we'll see that the jumps happen a lot more quickly and the pace swiftens. So 50,000 years ago, human beings live in tribes. They want more. They have communities. They have ceremonies, rituals. It's really the beginning of human culture. And then with this more developed desire also comes greater interconnection with other people. Now let's jump forward another bunch of time and see what happens 10,000 years ago. Again, desire grows. People aren't satisfied with living simple lives in small communities. And here we see an age where humans desire to control others, to conquer, to attain more and more power over others, right? And again, with that bigger desire came greater interconnectedness. And we were seeing empires spreading out over many states, many peoples, many lands, and really expanding power and ideas and beliefs and cultural habits from place to place. Now, jumping forward to about 5,000 years ago, again, there is a development, the desire changes and evolves, and people don't want to have all that chaos and destruction. They seek greater structure and more law, right? And they do that in the form of institutions like organized religion, and later, much later, the nation states. So this is so interesting. Parallel to this development, something called trade evolves, right? So right about the 1st century BC, a remarkable phenomenon occurred. For the first time in history, luxury products from China started to appear on the other edge of the Eurasian continent in Rome. And they got there after being hauled for thousands of miles along the Silk Road. So trade stopped being something local or regional and started to become global. Okay, so you're already seeing the trend here. What's happening? Human desire grows and globalization begins to take place. And this is happening a long time ago. So by the end of this very long period, there is the age of discovery, which really kicks off global trade, where European explorers connect East and West. They accidentally discover the Americas, and that really sets into motion what we kind of call the scientific era, right? And here it's very evident that human beings want more, right? We want a lot more. We want to discover, we want to innovate. We don't just want to believe in religion. We want to create our own heaven on earth here and now, right? We want to take our lives into our hands, so to speak. And all of this technology that is being evolved, it really puts a flame in the engine of globalization. Printing press evolved. This means people can copy information, send it to other places in the world. So it's no longer just about, very small elites having the access to the knowledge. Knowledge becomes dispersed. Information is spread widely and rapidly. And of course, we know how that evolved into our world today, the Industrial Revolution and the free international market, capitalism, globalization. So this, about 150 years ago, we were seeing globalization on steroids, right? Because there's telegraphs and telephones and the internet, and the world is really becoming a small global village. So you see how our desire grows and grows and grows, right? Social media, global media, that means we know everything that's happening everywhere. And not only can we travel around the world, but we want to have an impact on the world. You know, everybody wants to be an influencer these days. We all feel like we want to swallow the entire world and make it our own. And alongside that, there's new notions of cosmopolitanism, liberalism, communal sharing of life, and equality that all emerge, as well as all kinds of movements that are all about ecological and being globally attuned. So our desire grew, and so did our interdependence. And that brings us back to our days today. So we've come back full circle to where we started. And what we need to see is how these two opposite forces have really come to the peak, because today we're the most egoistic, our desires are the biggest, and yet we're also the more interconnected. We're dependent on everything else in the world. We know what's happening everywhere, and yet we're also super divided, and we have an opinion on everything. We have different camps and groups that are constantly fighting each other. And even though we're experiencing tremendous global crises that reflect this imbalanced state, we can't collaborate enough to correct them, whether it's climate, food, health, and so on. So this is really bringing us to a very interesting point, right? It's bringing us to a point where we have to make a leap. And the psychological models talk about it. Of course, Kabbalah talks about it. It's time for us to make a leap in consciousness. And also, for the first time in history, we human beings are actually becoming conscious of this process of evolution that we're on. We're becoming conscious of what's going on. We're beginning to ask questions. And that means that this leap in consciousness is about to take place, where we can become active participants in the process ourselves. So we want to take a look at this next level of consciousness. What is it exactly? What is it going to look like?
Yes. The next level of consciousness is why we're all here. So let's first take a look at what Bala Sulam again tells us about the unique property, the unique quality of human consciousness, and how it's so very different from everything that evolved before us. So he says this: all organisms develop by the same order. They undergo hundreds of permutations due to the two forces, the two opposite forces. For us, however, the material force is insufficient to bring us to completion due to the contemplative power in us. Thus, for humans, there's a new order of gradual development, unlike any other animal, the gradual development of human thought. So, what is that exactly? What are we talking about here? If we go back to the general outline of all of reality from the book of Zohar, from the wisdom of Kabbalah, we go back to these three states. Where are we now? We are at a point where the vessel starts regaining consciousness. Remember, it starts shaping up towards rising back from below upwards, rebuilding the relationship between the light and the vessel, but in a conscious way. And that whole process of the vessel begins with human development. That means we have a very unique opportunity here that nature is giving us. If we were to examine the growing difference between the two forces throughout evolution, then we would see something like this. On the still level, there's some tension, some oppositeness. Here in the diagram, it's a delta. This triangle means delta, which is just a mathematical symbol for difference. So the difference between the plus and the minus, the opposite forces, the light and the vessel, manifests at a small degree on the still level. On the vegetative level, where we have more complex organisms, we have more diversity and more connection, right? More oppositeness, more delta, more difference between the plus and the minus. On the animate level, more complex organisms, more difference between the plus and the minus. On the human level, the oppositeness between the two opposite forces, between the plus and the minus, let's say, is so great that the completion has to involve the consciousness of the organisms. So in other words, in all those levels before us, the still, vegetative, and animate, the plus and minus come to a completion by instinct. So bacteria fight each other for 1 billion years, literally, and ultimately something new emerges. And then the next level of life also goes through the same slow process of development until by instinct, by the laws of nature, and that's it, they come to a completion. But on the human level, the actual completion between the plus and the minus, the two opposite forces, has to involve our conscious participation. And that means that nature is giving us a unique opportunity that doesn't exist in all the other levels. Let's see what Baal HaSulam writes about it. The law of development, which is spread over the whole of reality, acts without asking permission from the dwellers of earth. Just for a second, what does that mean? That means that the laws of nature are deterministic, and the evolution that has to happen will happen and is happening, and we've got nothing to say in the matter. That's not where our choice lies. Nature has a plan to grow and evolve the created being, and ultimately, we know from the 3 states, right, that ultimately the goal is to bring the light and the vessel to complete conscious unity. That will happen. Doesn't matter whether we like it or not. However, he continues, the law of development placed mind and authority in man's hands and permitted man to accept the law of development under his own authority and government, handing him the ability to hasten the process of development as he wishes, freely and completely independent of the boundaries of time. Let's take a second to digest what Baal HaSulam is telling us here. We have the opportunity, because the development is now happening on the level of consciousness, right? He called it before, Baal HaSulam called it before, the gradual development of human thought that doesn't exist in any other organism. Because that exists on the human level, it means that instead of waiting for the two forces, the plus and the minus, to shape us over time like 1 billion years with the bacteria or the rest of nature, slowly and painfully, instead of that, we can consciously, deliberately awaken these forces within us, in our consciousness, and bring them to completion with our conscious participation. And if we do that inside of us, these forces don't have to push us from outside. So for example, just to understand the gravity of what we're talking about, this could be the difference between whether we'll see another world war on this planet or not. Because the two opposite forces have to achieve their balance, have to achieve their higher level of emergence. But because we have this latitude of consciousness, because we're consciously involved in the process, we can take the reins and begin to actively bring about the new level of connection between the two opposite forces. That is what Kabbalah is all about. That is why we're all here, and that is why the world is now in the condition that it is. All of Kabbalah is essentially this: how to consciously work with the two opposite forces within us. This is why the practice of Kabbalah always happens between people, in groups. If you take a look at this diagram here, what it shows is these red dots they represent our desires. Let's say they just represent people who are trying to work together on aiming their desires, their intentions towards something called the center of the circle between them. We're not going to get into that now. Gianni and Sarah will go in depth into that right afterwards. But by trying to essentially aim for the higher level of connection between them, what begins to appear in each person who's doing that effort is the manifestation of these two opposite forces. So by working on achieving our higher level of connection between us with other people, we begin to observe and empirically feel and work with the two opposite forces of nature. And in us, they appear as our ego on the one hand, which basically means our growing conscious sense of separation from others. That is something that we experience firsthand internally, consciously, when we start working with other people. But on the other hand, we also get to experience the counter force, the positive force, you can say, which we call in Kabbalah the point in the heart. PIH here. Point in the heart simply means our desire for spirituality. Remember the exercise that Tal gave us a while ago when we started this session? What is that point? What does it actually want? What does it want from us? Or what do we want from it if we had a genie and so forth? That point actually comes from here. If we go back, let's show it here actually. That point comes from here. It's the same spark of light that entered the lowest level of the will to receive that we identify as a big bang that created the material world. That spark of light ultimately manifests, drives all of evolution, brings together with the opposite force, it brings about the still, the vegetative, and the animate level. And on the human level, it appears to us, to our consciousness, as a desire for a higher level of reality, a desire for spirituality, which we don't even know how to explain and what it exactly wants in the beginning. But that's the point where human development is actually the point where the vessel begins to become conscious again. And so that is where we are today. And that is what Kabbalah is all about. And if we learn how to work with the two forces internally on the level of human consciousness, we can actually learn how they build a higher level of consciousness within us of our own accord instead of being pushed by all of this process from the outside. That is what we hope that all of you who are here will at least somewhat begin to experience today between us.
Right. And I saw somebody asked, are we interfering with the process if we do this? So the answer is, this is exactly what the process wants, right? This is what Asaf was saying, that we're coming to exactly the culmination of all these years, billions of years of evolution. And the whole purpose is for us, the most evolved part in nature, to attain this consciousness, to begin to participate in this transformation ourselves. And that was the whole point. So of course, it's what we want. It's what nature wants. It's the whole purpose of this process. So we are facing a global transformation. We all feel it. It's happening, right? Everything's changing. The old world is falling apart and something new wants to be created. This transformation is really inevitable. And here is where we're standing before two paths, really. We have a choice. So we're really summarizing everything that we've discussed until now. We're standing before these two paths, and we can choose which one to take. Are we going to continue on the path that humanity is on now, where nature is basically pressuring us to evolve, pushing us forward? We can look at the next slide now with the two paths so everybody can visualize them with me. So are we going to take that path, or are we actually going to be conscious in this participation? Are we going to take the reins of nature into our own hands, these two forces that are active in nature, and like Asaf was saying, begin to play with them inside of us and create that balance within us, create that peace, that harmony, that correct integration of these two forces within us, and by that actually influence what happens outside of us in our reality. So what we want to say is that nature is really, oh, there they are, the two paths. So we're already on the path towards our conscious evolution. And we want to say that nature is really inviting us now to awaken on a global scale. And it is, like Asaf was saying, it's probably what drew you here today, right? It's that point in the heart that pulled you in today. So we want you to consider yourself invited to lead the way, to lead humanity, to lead together towards this greater state, this emergent state of humanity that we're moving into. This is really the best time for spiritual development. And your personal transformation really does help to tip the scales for everyone else. So let's just think back again on that desire from the beginning of the exercise and remember what you thought of, what you asked for. Maybe now that we've been through this journey throughout all of history, maybe you have a broader or deeper idea of where your spiritual desire is taking you. And again, remember, this reality is not material. So like we were saying, it's human desire that drives evolution. What you want, what you feel, what you intention for will actually influence your fate, your destiny, and the destiny of the entire world. We want you to continue to clarify your desire, to really own in to that spiritual state that you want, to really continue to understand it, to grow it and develop it.
The authentic wisdom of Kabbalah gives you the power to unlock the spiritual potential of our time. Thousands of KabU students around the world already experience this on a regular basis. We're inviting you to get a real taste of it. Experience Kabbalah will be a 4-hour virtual event filled with experiential lessons, interactive workshops, and some unique Kabbalistic practices, all wrapped in the welcoming atmosphere of our thriving global community. You'll be among people from all walks of life who share a common desire to experience the spiritual reality. Registration is open to everyone on a pay-whatever-you-wish basis, so if you have that desire in you, we'll see you there.